Well, a slew of new cuts have led to a fresh eruption of public anger and protest in Spain. The rallies quickly turned violent when police charged and beat demonstrators while firing rubber bullets. More than 70 people were injured in the clashes. The austerity cuts driving the troubles include tax hikes and the promise of painful pension changes. But the protesters say they're being made to pay for the mistake of politicians and bankers. The measures were demanded by Spain's EU creditors, who've pledged Madrid a vital bailout for crippled Spanish banks. More now on the economic and social crisis there with Gonzalo Lira, founder of the LiraSPG.com crisis planning organization. Thanks for being with us on the line from Santiago. Again, many of the protesters say it's greedy bankers and colluding politicians that should be punished for starting this crisis. Do you see that actually happening?
Well, they're right on the one hand because the greedy bankers and the incompetent government have not been able to solve the financial crisis. But on the other hand, what has happened is that the people have been accustomed to extraordinarily generous benefits over the last 10, 15 years, frankly, benefits that the Spanish government, the Spanish people could ill afford. Now, a lot of these structural reforms insofar as employment benefits and the rest of it were carried out in Germany during the so-called good times of 2003, 2005, and so on. But now that these structural reforms, especially employment reforms, are necessarily going to have to be carried out in Spain at the same time that you have a severe economic depression going on in Spain, well, of course, it's going to hurt people much, much more than if these structural reforms had been carried out during good times.
One of the last unbroken promises the government in Spain made was not to touch the pension system. Now they say that they'll be reforming it. Is the crisis so dire that promises are just too cheap to keep?
Yes, you're exactly right. Because, look, this isn't a basic accounting problem. If you have, too much money flowing out and not enough money flowing in terms of tax receipts and the rest of it, then, of course, eventually you're going to go bankrupt. And that is what's going on with Spain. Now, of course, all these pensions are simply too generous for the Spanish government to be able to afford. Now, they are going to have to cut them. And, of course, as they continue to cut them, because, as I say, this is basic accounting. Okay? Now, as they continue to cut these benefits, you're going to see more and more social unrest. And this is going to affect principally the center parties, both center left and center right, to the advantage of the extreme parties, both far left and far right. And so I would expect to see more and more protests that turn violent and more growth in the extreme political parties as these extremist parties begin to make political hay out of the people's discontent. We're going to see this in Spain, we're going to see it in Italy, and we're going to see it in France in the near-term future, be it the next year or two. And so this is just the beginning. We're going to see a lot worse soon.
Don't you think something that might worsen that is the fact that we're basically getting the message that bankers and the banks are immune to any of the mistakes that they made? It's, of course, not just in Spain, but all over the world really now.
Yes, and that's exactly the fault of the politicians who are in power, because they are so beholden to the financial interests, basically the banksters, as they're famously called, that they are unwilling to do the reforms that need to be done insofar as the banking system is concerned. The banks' profits are obscene. The fact that these governments are bailing them out continuously is just simply unconscionable. Now, of course, the people realize this and they are upset about it. But, of course, the politicians do absolutely nothing to rein in the banksters and instead put out the police to start, to be quite vulgar about it, cracking heads and not solving the problems that we have. We have, on the one hand, an out-of-control financial sector, which is basically raping the public till. And on the other hand, you have necessary cuts to the very, very generous social safety net that had been promised, but simply those promises cannot be kept because it's simply too expensive. Now, this is just a recipe for more and more social discontent that we are going to see throughout the EU.
Right, and you say that you expect mass protests, really, and in Spain, one of the features that has defined these protests is that they do often end in violence, quite tough violence sometimes. We've seen clashes in Valencia, Barcelona, Madrid. Why are the police so heavy-handed? Is that going to solve the problem?
No, certainly not. The reason the police is so heavy-handed is because the people in power, the political leadership in the EU as well as the United States, don't quite seem to understand what is going on, and they don't quite seem to understand that they are beholden to the banksters. And so they are acting on behalf of the banksters in a, frankly, I would call it a kleptocratic regime. Now, they are simply, protecting the richest people in society, which are the banksters. And they are saying that you have to comply. And this security state that we have had over the last 10, 15 years, certainly after the terrorist attacks at the beginning of the decade, this has led politicians to assume that more force is needed to maintain the peace. And this, of course, means more violence against people. And more violence against the people means more protests down the line as they are squeezed economically, socially, and politically.
Right, as that word banksters gathers more and more negative connotations. Gonzalo Lira, founder of LiraSPG.com Crisis Planning Group. Thank you very much for your analysis.
My pleasure. Thank you.